Chapter 10, Part 2 of Aircraft and Submarines by Willis J. Abbott. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by William Tomko. Some Features of Aerial Warfare, Part 2. It would be gratifying to author and to reader alike if it were possible to give some account of the progress in aerial equipment made by the United States since its declaration of war. But at the present moment, February, 1918, the government is chary of furnishing information concerning the advance made in the creation of an aerial fleet. Perhaps precise information, if available, would be discouraging to the many who believe that the war will be won in the air. For it is known in a broad general way that the activities of the administration have been centered upon the construction of training camps and aviation stations. Orders for the actual construction of airplanes have been limited, so that a chorus of criticism arose from manufacturers who declared that they might have to close their works for lack of employment. The apparent check was discouraging to American airmen, and to our Allies, who had expected marvelous things from the United States in the way of swift and wholesale preparation for winning battles in the air. The response of the government to all criticism was that it was laying broad foundations in order that construction once begun would proceed with unabated activity, and that when aircraft began to be turned out by the thousands a week, there would be aviators and trained mechanics aplenty to handle them. In this situation, the advocates of a special cabinet department of aeronautics found new reason to criticize the administration and Congress for having ignored or antagonized their appeals. For responsibility for the delay and indifference, if indifference there was, rested equally upon the Secretary of the Navy and the Secretary of War. Each had his measure of control over the enormous sum voted in a lump for aviation. Each had the further millions especially voted to his department to account for. But no single individual could be officially asked what had been done with the almost $1 billion voted for aeronautics in 1917. But if the authorities seemed to lag, the inventors were busy. Mention has already been made of the new Liberty motor, which report had it was the fruit of the imprisonment of two mechanical experts in a hotel room, with orders that they should not be freed until they had produced a motor which met all criticisms upon those now in use. Their product is said to have met this test, and the happy result caused a general wish that the Secretaries of War and of the Navy might be similarly incarcerated and only liberated upon producing plans for the immediate creation of an aerial fleet suited to the nation's needs. If, however, the Liberty motor shall prove the complete success which at the moment the government believes it to be, it will be such a spur to the development of the airplane in peace and war as could not otherwise be applied. For the motor is the true life of the airplane, its heart, lungs, and nerve center. The few people who still doubt the wide adoption of aircraft for peaceful purposes after the war base their skepticism on the treachery of motors still in use. They repudiate all comparisons with automobiles. They say, "It is perfectly true that a man can run his car repeatedly from New York to Boston without motor trouble, but the trouble is inevitable sooner or later. When it comes to an automobile it is trifling. The driver gets out and makes his repairs by the roadside. But if it comes to the aviator, it brings the possibility of death with it every time. If his motor stops, he must descend. But to alight he must find a long, level field, with at least 200 yards in which to run off his momentum. If, when he discovers the failure of his motor, he is flying at the height of a mile, he must find his landing place within a space of 8 miles, for in gliding to earth the ratio of forward movement to height is as 8 to 1. But how often in rugged and densely populated New England or Pennsylvania is there a vacant level field half a mile in length? The aviator who made a practice of daily flight between New York and Boston would inevitably meet death in the end. The criticism is a shrewd and searching one, but it is based on the airplane and the motor of to day without allowance for the development and improvement which are proceeding apace. It contemplates a craft which has but one motor, but the more modern machines have sufficient lifting power to carry 2 motors, and can be navigated successfully with one of these out of service. Experiments, furthermore, are being made with a device after the type of the helicopter which, with the steady lightening of the aircraft motor, may be installed on airplanes with a special motor for its operation. This device, it is believed, will enable the airplane so equipped to stop dead in its course with both propellers out of action, to hover over a given spot, or to rise or to descend gently in a perpendicular line without the necessity of soaring. It is obvious that if this device proves successful, the chief force of the objections to aerial navigation, outlined above, will be nullified. The menace of infrequent landing places will quickly remedy itself on busy lines of aerial traffic. The average railroad doing business in a densely populated section has stations once every 8 or 10 miles, which, with their sidings, buildings, water tanks, etc., cost far more than the field half a mile long with a few hangars that the flyers will need as a place of refuge. Indeed, although for its size and apparent simplicity of construction an airplane is phenomenally costly, in the grand total of cost an aerial line would cost a tithe of the ordinary railway. It has neither right-of-way, roadbed, rails, nor telegraph system to maintain, and if the average flyer seems to cost amazingly, it still foots up less than one-fifth the cost of a modern locomotive, though its period of service is much shorter. Just at the present time aircraft costs are high, based on artificial conditions in the market. Their construction is a new industry, its processes not yet standardized, its materials still experimental in many ways and not yet systematically produced. A light sporting monoplane, which superficially seems to have about $250 worth of materials in it, exclusive of the engine, will cost about $3,000. A fighting biplane will touch $10,000. Yet the latter seems to the lay observer to contain no costly materials to justify so great a charge. The wings are a light wooden framework, usually of spruce, across which a fine grade of linen cloth is stretched. The materials are simple enough, but every bit of wood, every screw, every strand of wire is selected with the utmost care, and the workmanship of their assemblage is as painstaking as the setting of the most precious stones. "Remember, the least negligence may cost a life," is a sign frequently seen hanging over the work benches in an airplane factory. When stretched over the framework, the cloth of the wings is treated to a dressing down of a preparation of collodion, which in the jargon of the shop is called "dope." This substance has a peculiar effect upon the cloth, causing it to shrink and thus making it more taut and rigid than it could be by the most careful stretching. Though the layman would not suspect it, this wash alone costs about $150 a machine. The seaplanes, too, or hydro-airplanes, as purists call them, present a curious illustration of unexpected and, it would seem, unexplainable expense. Where the flyer over land has 2 bicycle wheels on which to land, the flyer over the sea has 2 flat-bottomed boats, or pontoons. These cost from $1,000 to $1,200 and look as though they should cost not over $100. But the necessity of combining maximum strength with minimum weight sends the price soaring as the machine itself soars. Moreover, there is not yet the demand for either air or seaplanes that would result in the division of labor, standardization of parts, and other manufacturing economies which reduce the cost of products. To the high cost of aircraft their comparative fragility is added as a reason for their unfitness for commercial uses. The engine costs from $2,000 to $5,000 each, are very delicate, and usually must be taken out of the plane and overhauled after about 100 hours of active service. The strain on them is prodigious, for it is estimated that the number of revolutions of an airplane's engine during an hour's flight is equal to the number of revolutions of an automobile's wheels during active service of a whole month. It is believed that the superior lightness and durability of the Liberty motor will obviate some of these objections to the commercial availability of aircraft in times of peace. And it is certain that with the cessation of the war, the retirement of the governments of the world from the purchasing field, and the reduction of the demand for aircraft to such as are needed for pleasure and industrial uses, the prices which we have cited will be cut in half. In such event, what will be the future of aircraft? What their part in the social and industrial organization of the world? 10 or a dozen years ago, Rudyard Kipling entertained the English reading public of the world with a vivacious sketch of aerial navigation in the year 2000 A.D. He used the license of a poet in avoiding too precise descriptions of what is to come, dealing rather with broad and picturesque generalizations. Now the year 2000 is still far enough away for pretty much anything to be invented, and to become commonplace before that era arrives. Airships of the sort Mr. Kipling pictured may by that period have come and gone, have been relegated to the museums along with the stage coaches of yesterday and the locomotives of today. For that matter, before that millennial period shall arrive, men may have learned to dispense with material transportation altogether, and be able to project their consciousness or even their astral bodies to any desired point on psychic waves. If a poet is going to prophesy, he might as well be audacious and even revolutionary in his predictions. Mr. Kipling tried so hard to be reasonable that he made himself recognizably wrong so far as the present tendency of aircraft development would indicate. With the Night Mail is a story of a trip by night across the Atlantic from England to America. It is made in a monster dirigible, though the present tendency is to reject the dirigible for the swifter, less costly and more airworthy (leave seaworthy to the plodding ships on old ocean's breast) airplanes. If, however, we condone this glaring improbability, we find Mr. Kipling's tale full of action and imaginary incident that give it an air of truth. His ship is not docked on the ground at the tempest's mercy, but is moored high in air to the top of a tall tower, up which passengers and freight are conveyed in elevators. His lighthouses send their beams straight up into the sky, instead of projecting them horizontally, as do those which now guard our coasts. Just why lighthouses are needed, however, he does not explain. There are no reefs on which a packet of the air may run, no lee shores which they must avoid. On overland voyages, guiding lights by night may be useful, as great white direction strips laid out on the ground are even now suggested as guides for daylight flying. But the main reliance of the airman must be his compass. Crossing the broad oceans no lighted path is possible, and even in a voyage from New York to Chicago or from London to Rome, good airmanship will dictate flight at a height that will make reliance upon natural objects as a guide perilous. The airman has the advantage over the sailor in that he may lay his course on leaving his port or flying field and pursue it straight as an arrow to his destination. No rocks or other obstacles bar his path, nor tortuous channels must be navigated. All that can divert him from his chosen course is a steady wind on the beam, and that is instantly detected by his instruments and allowance made for it. On the other hand, the sailor has a certain advantage over the airman in that his more leisurely progress allows time for the rectification of errors in course arising from contrary currents or winds. An error of a point, or even two, amounts to but little in a day's steaming of perhaps 400 miles. It can readily be remedied, unless the ship is too near shore. But when the whole 3,000 miles of Atlantic are covered in 20 hours in the air, the course must be right from the start, and exactly adhered to, else the passenger for New York may set down in Florida. It is not improbable that even before the war is over, the crossing of the Atlantic by plane will be accomplished. Certainly it will be one of the first tasks undertaken by airmen on the return of peace. But it is probable that the adaptation of aircraft to commercial uses will be begun with undertakings of smaller proportions. Already the United States maintains an aerial mail route to Alaska, while Italy has military mail routes served by airplanes in the Alps. These have been undertaken because of the physical obstacles to travel on the surface, presented in those rugged neighborhoods. But in the more densely populated regions of the United States, considerations of financial profit will almost certainly result in the early establishment of mail and passenger air service. Air service will cut down the time between any two given points at least one half, and ultimately two-thirds. Letters could be sent from New York to Boston, or even to Buffalo, and an answer received the same day. The carrying plane could take on each trip 5 tons of mail. Philadelphia would be brought within 45 minutes of New York, Washington within 2 hours instead of the present 5. Is there any doubt of the creation of an aerial passenger service under such conditions? Already a Caproni triplane will carry 35 passengers besides guns, say 50 passengers if all other load be excluded, and has flown with a lighter load from Newport News to New York. It is easily imaginable that by 1920 the airplane capable of carrying 80 persons, or the normal number now accommodated on an interurban trolley car, will be an accomplished fact. The lines that will thus spring up will need no rails, no right-of-way, no expensive power plant. Their physical property will be confined to the airplanes themselves and to the fields from which the craft rise and on which they alight, with the necessary hangars. These indeed will involve heavy expenditure. For a busy line, with frequent sailings, a high-speed machine's field will need to be in the neighborhood of a mile square. A plane swooping down for its landing is not to be held up at the switch, like a train, while room is made for it. It is an imperative guest, and cannot be gainsaid. Accordingly, the fields must be large enough to accommodate scores of planes at once and give each new arrival a long straight course on which to run off its momentum. It is obvious, therefore, that the Union stations for aircraft routes cannot be in the hearts of our cities as are the railroad stations of today, but must be fairly well out in the suburbs. A form of machine which the professional airmen say has yet to be developed is the small monoplane, carrying 2 passengers at most, and of low speed, not more than 20 miles an hour at most. In this age of speed mania the idea of deliberately planning a conveyance or vehicle that shall not exceed a low limit seems out of accord with public desire. But the low-speed airplane has the advantage of needing no extended field in which to alight. It reaches the ground with but little momentum to be taken up and can be brought up standing on the roof of a house or the deck of a ship. Small machines of this sort are likely to serve as the runabouts of the air, to succeed the trim little automobile roadsters as pleasure craft. The beginning of the 4th year of the war brought a notable change in aerial tactics. For 3 years everything had been sacrificed to speed. Such aerial duels as have been described were encouraged by the fact that aircraft were reduced to the proportions needful for carrying 1 man and a machine gun. The gallant flyers went up in the air and killed each other. That was about all there was to it. While as scouts, range finders, guides for the artillery, they exerted some influence on the course of the war, as a fighting arm in its earlier years, they were without efficiency. The bombing forays were harassing, but little more, because the craft engaged were of too small capacity to carry enough bombs to work really serious damage, while the ever-increasing range of the Archies compels the airmen to deliver their fire from so great a height as to make accurate aim impossible. But Kiel, Wilhelmshaven, and Zeebrugge are likely to change all this. The constant contemplation of these nests for the sanctuary of pestiferous submarines, effectively guarded against attack by either land or water, has stirred up the determination of the Allies to seek their destruction from above. Heavy bombing planes are being built in all the Allied workshops for this purpose, and furthermore to give effect to the British determination to take vengeance upon Germany for her raids upon London. It is reported that the United States, by agreement with its Allies, is to specialize in building the light, swift scout planes, but in other shops the heavy triplane, the dreadnought of the air, is expected to be the feature of 1918. With it will come an entirely novel strategic use of aircraft in war, and with it too, which is perhaps the more permanently important, will come the development of aircraft of the sort that will be readily adaptable to the purposes of peace, when the war shall end. End of Some Features of Aerial Warfare, Part II. Recording by William Tomko.